Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, we talked about scale and shock, the sheer size of Russia's winter strike packages and what that meant for Ukraine's energy grid. Today, the picture is less about novelty and more about persistence. Russia followed up those massive January 19 to 20 strikes with another coordinated wave overnight, mixing drones and missiles, and again targeting civilian and energy infrastructure. Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, and multiple other regions took hits. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted most of the drones, but enough got through to keep power, water, and heating disruptions firmly in the ongoing crisis category rather than a one-off event. This is no longer escalation. It's maintenance. What's different today is how openly Ukrainian officials are describing the intent. There's less hedging, less diplomatic phrasing. The assessment being pushed now is that Russia isn't just trying to degrade infrastructure, it's trying to make urban life temporarily unworkable during peak winter conditions. Kyiv officials are putting numbers to it. Tens of thousands of buildings without heat, large portions of the city without electricity, and sustained civilian outflows. Yesterday, we framed this as pressure warfare. Today, it's being described as an attempt to empty cities without having to occupy them. At the same time, the nuclear risk thread we flagged yesterday hasn't disappeared. It's just slipped into the background noise, which may be even more concerning. While there wasn't another Chernobyl-style off-site power loss reported today, Ukrainian officials stressed that repeated strikes on energy transmission nodes are still happening. The implication is clear. Russia doesn't need to hit a nuclear facility directly to create nuclear-adjacent risk. It just needs to keep rolling the dice on the grid. Moscow, predictably, continues to dismiss these concerns as exaggeration, sticking with the same deny-and-deflect approach it's used since Zaporizhzhia was militarized. Same movie, same plot, different scene. Ukraine is still hitting back inside Russia, and today's reporting adds texture rather than surprise. Following yesterday's discussion of refinery and depot strikes, Ukrainian drones struck energy facilities again in Belgorod and Oriol. Power and water outages followed, and in Belgorod, authorities evacuated residents after unexploded ammunition landed in city streets. Smolensk also saw drone activity, with explosions reported and a fire breaking out at the aviation plant there. Yesterday, this trend looked like a warning shot. Today, it looks like a campaign, targeting not just symbolism, but systems Russians actually rely on. Diplomatically, we're in update mode, not breakthrough mode. U.S. envoys continued their shuttle between Ukrainian officials in Davos and Russian leadership in Moscow. The headline claim that a deal is reasonably close hasn't changed since yesterday, but the subtext has sharpened. Multiple sources now describe negotiations as being narrowed almost entirely to territorial questions. That framing matters. It suggests that broader issues like reconstruction sequencing or even sanctions relief are being sidelined in favor of the hardest, most politically radioactive topic first. Russia's public posture hasn't softened at all. If anything, it's become more explicit. Kremlin-linked figures reiterated that Russia views the occupied territories as permanently Russian and rejects any role for NATO forces in Ukraine. Dmitry Medvedev again leaned into imperial language about reclaiming land, a reminder that even while talks continue, Moscow is still speaking in a register that predates the post-Cold War order. Yesterday, we talked about the surreal contrast between diplomacy and bombardment. Today, that contrast feels normalized, which may be the point. NATO leadership clearly doesn't love this moment. Mark Rutte used Davos to recenter the conversation on Ukraine, warning European governments not to get distracted by unrelated political drama. What stood out today wasn't the rhetoric, but the logistics. Rutte openly said Ukraine is running out of air defense interceptors and urged countries to search their stockpiles for anything they can spare. This builds directly on yesterday's math problem: cheap Russian drones versus expensive Western interceptors. Today's message was basically, the spreadsheet is ugly, but ignoring it won't fix it. On the battlefield, the ground war remains attritional and unglamorous, which is exactly why it matters. Russian forces continued grinding attacks across Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia, with limited but real gains near places like Kostiantynivka. Ukrainian forces reported their own advances in parts of western Zaporizhzhia. Around Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, Ukrainian commanders described multi-kilometer drone kill zones designed to break up small Russian infiltration groups. Compared to yesterday, the update here is confirmation. This isn't a temporary tactic. It's the dominant mode of fighting. What's new today is more evidence of Russian improvisation under constraint. Ukrainian reporting described Russian units repurposing systems never meant for frontline use. Training missiles adapted for ground strikes, unmanned ground vehicles fitted with heavy rocket systems, and increased reliance on motorcycles and ATVs to move through fire zones. Yesterday, we talked about adaptation. Today, it feels more like desperation disguised as innovation. The intelligence and internal security picture also widened further. Building on yesterday's espionage arrests in Europe, German authorities detailed how a suspected Russian agent collected information on drone deliveries and defense industry sites and helped a handler access political events under false identities. Separate arrests targeted individuals accused of funding pro-Russian militias. Estonia sentenced a border guard for quietly feeding operational details to Russian intelligence for years. These aren't flashy spy stories. They're slow, cumulative efforts to map systems and pressure support networks. Yesterday, these felt peripheral. Today, they feel central. Inside Russia, the security services leaned hard into the internal threat narrative. The FSB announced it had thwarted a planned terrorist attack on a police facility in Ufa, killing one suspect during arrest and detaining another. At the same time, Russian courts handed down a life sentence for the 2024 assassination of a senior Russian general, a case Moscow continues to frame as proof of Ukrainian state-sponsored terrorism. This is about more than justice. It's about reinforcing a sense of siege at home. Domestically, the political and economic strain we discussed yesterday hasn't eased. Reporting today highlighted growing concern inside the Kremlin about how to campaign ahead of the 2026 Duma elections without leaning too hard into a war-weary electorate. At the same time, Russia's budget outlook is deteriorating. Weak oil prices and heavy early-year spending are driving a sharp deficit, with analysts warning that reserve funds could be drawn down faster than the government admits. Yesterday, we talked about endurance over prosperity. Today reinforced that endurance is getting more expensive. Beyond Russia proper, the pressure ripples continue. In Chechnya, ongoing speculation about Ramzan Kadyrov's health is fueling uncertainty about succession and stability. In Georgia, arrests of former ruling party insiders under the banner of anti-corruption are increasingly viewed as internal power consolidation rather than reform. These aren't isolated stories. They're reminders that prolonged war stresses every system connected to Moscow, not just the front lines. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.